At the relatively young age of 31 years in 2001, Tan Sri Shahril Ridza Ridzuan was plucked from relative obscurity with Dato Rahman Ahmad to lead the corporate restructuring of the MRCB and Media Prima Group. Known for being a turnaround specialist and high-performance leader, he later moved on to successfully lead Malaysian government GLIC's EPF and Khazanah Nasional. Today, he is the chairman of Axiata Group and sits on the boards of Equinas, Dana Harta, KLK and CGS International. On this final episode of Season 1 of Cuba Cerita, let's meet this reserved and empathetic, yet hugely talented and experienced leader. Together, let's explore what's in his DNA as a nation builder. Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera, apa khabar semua? Thanks so much again for joining us for our latest series of Cuba Cerita, the DNA of Nation Builders. I must say that it's been an enjoyable first season, and all good things must come to an end. But it's not a permanent end, but I have to say that actually this is going to be our last episode for our first season. And this is episode number 15. So over the last couple of months, we've had a brilliant array of guests who have come on to the podcast episodes, and I'm sure all of you have been enjoying it. So we decided that, yes, it's a good conclusion to the first season, and inshallah, in April, we'll be starting our next season. But today, we are still on to our final season, and to commemorate, or rather to be very much in line with the theme, the DNA of Nation Builders, we are so fortunate to have a very distinguished guest, someone who has, who is a true blue nation builder. And I'm sure all of you would agree that it's a pleasure having him. He's none other than Tan Sri Shahril Ridza Ridzuan, a name very, well known within the corporate circles of Malaysia. So, terima kasih Tan Sri. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure, and I really appreciate you allocating your busy time in your schedule to come and join us today. So welcome to Cuba Cerita.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure. And I'm actually not that busy because I am semi-retired.
You are semi-retired.
So it is a pleasure to come on and maybe share a bit of what I've done and whatever you want to ask. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And I'm glad to know that you also have been following a few episodes, and and hopefully that also enlightened you, to encourage you to come and accept the invitation. And as you know, it's really about getting to know you, Tan Sri, kan? There's so much written about you, your career and your corporate life, and of course you may feel that you're semi-retired, but even this week alone there was also another announcement of you and Saudara Khairi Jamaluddin's appointment to the board of CGS International. So I'm sure that in this retired period of your life, you still are very much in demand as a leader, and of course obviously your experience and talent. So congratulations too on that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, so I really just want to really, get to know you also as a person, and we'll talk about your highlights of your career and maybe some reflections of final points of that too. But you are a KL boy. You grew up in KL?
Well, I was actually born in Johor Bahru because at that time my father was a policeman and my mum was a teacher, was stationed there. So I was born in Johor Bahru.
Okay.
But came back to KL fairly soon after that, right, when we were posted back to KL. And I actually spent a couple of years growing up in and around Kampung Baru, where my mum's family are. Spent a couple of years in the UK because my father was fortunate to get a scholarship to do the bar and qualify as a lawyer.
Really?
But I did all my schooling basically up on St. John's Hill, right, from Fatimah Kindergarten to St. John's Primary to St. John's Secondary.
Right. And I guess in those days, everyone would converge into KL from the surrounding areas also to come to St. John's. So it was not just about a purely urban population, right? Yeah.
That's right. That's right. I think one of the great things about the schooling system in those days, basically, is that you had a very good mix of people, right? And I think that's what made Malaysian education so good in the 70s and 80s, right? You had people from urban backgrounds, from semi-urban, different social strata, different wealth classes, and it was a good way, I think, to build unity and foster that unity, right? Which I guess currently in this day and age is a bit harder with the way the education system has fractured a bit in terms of people making choices, right, on where to put their kids.
And again, in reflection, in those days, we didn't really look at differences. It was just
Correct.
We just got along. I think again, maybe that's a different topic for a different occasion. But in reflection, yeah, it is very different from what it was in those days.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you had a great opportunity education-wise too, and I think you're one of the few that I know or have at least read up of people who have had a very distinguished tertiary education. So you were at both Oxford and Cambridge. You graduated as a lawyer. You were called to the bar of the UK and as well as Malaysia. In the early part of your career, did you practice law?
Yeah, when you're a teenager, right, and you start thinking about education and what you want to do, you generally, and this is quite common for everyone, I think, you generally have no idea, right? and in those days, right, when I'd finished basically my SPM, won a scholarship to do my A levels. And when you're doing your A levels, in those days, if you're a Malaysian, there's only 4 things you applied for, right? The accounting, accounting, law, medicine, or engineering, right?
Yeah.
So I took the path of least resistance since my dad was a lawyer. I ended up doing law. So did my degree, did my master's, did the bar, came back, chambered, worked for about a year, and then realized basically that I couldn't really see myself doing this for the rest of my life. So made a decision at that point to try something different, right? So then I moved into oil and gas. I moved into basically corporate restructuring. Then the Asian financial crisis came. Joined Dana Harta as one of the early employees there. So did bank rescue. Then me and my close friend Rahman left Dana Harta together, and we set up our own firm doing the same thing, rescue, but now on the private side. And then one thing led to another, and
So you knew Dato Rahman as what, from your varsity days, or?
Yeah, so we were basically in Cambridge together, right? And so he was doing economics, I was doing law, but we were basically the same year. And he's 1 year older because I actually accelerated my A levels to go in 1 year earlier. But essentially, we've known each other from university days. Yeah.
Wow, fantastic. In fact, I'm going to come to that in a little while. But tell me, in those days, I mean, I understand you were maybe not hardly 30 when you set out to to establish this company, and of course Rahman being a close friend, you both had confidence in each other. But wasn't that quite a rarity to actually think about going that route, especially with with the type of qualifications you already had? I'm sure that there were opportunities in abundance for you to just pursue the normal professional career. So reflecting, what actually motivated you to actually decide to set up a company of sorts like that?
I think it was driven really by a couple of things. I think one, we saw a gap in the market, an opportunity basically to provide a particular set of recovery services in terms of basically corporate rescue, M&A, in a time during the Asian financial crisis, essentially when there was a big need for that, right? And we targeted companies and clients who maybe couldn't afford the big banks to work for them, right? So we provided advice, right? And it was actually quite an interesting journey because you learn, the pitfalls of, effectively doing a startup business. How do you manage that? How do you find clients, right? It's a very, esoteric kind of field, right? I mean, it's not as if you can actually advertise and what you do, and it's interesting. You learn basically how to survive, right? But one thing led to another. We ended up taking on some larger projects, and then that led to things like the rescue of IWK in the Water Consortium. Right, we worked on the UEM Renong transaction, and finally did the MRCB transaction, where we then ended up actually entering in as management to do the rescue from inside the company as opposed from the outside.
Okay, so this actually already has come to that point where I first came to know of in those days, of course, Dana Harta. So you were part of the team in Dana Harta under Tan Sri Azman Yahya, kan? Okay. Of course, in those days it was just Encik Azman Yahya. So what was it like? I mean, were you already known within that circle of talents to be brought into Dana Harta? Obviously, it seems to me very specialized in terms of what you do. It was a critical need, obviously, but just to share, how were the teams formed in those days, and how do you really know what you guys need to do in terms of getting the job done and all that?
Well, that's actually quite interesting because during the height of the Asian financial crisis, right, Ram and I were still doing corporate activity. At that time, I think we were working on the rescues of things like Trenergy and Metrovision and stuff like that, right? But at the time, basically, when government decided to form Dana Jamin and Dana Harta to resolve basically the crisis in the banking industry, there were ads in newspapers, right, seeking people to join up. Right, and we saw the ad and we thought, oh, that looks interesting. So we just responded to a newspaper ad and applied.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's not as if we were headhunted or people who knew who we were, anything of that sort, right? It's actually very simple. We just saw the ad. We thought that looks really interesting. It's something which the country needs at this point in time, right? And we thought, yeah, why not, right? So yeah, both of us were there, and it was very, very interesting because obviously we had taken some lessons learned from other countries on what they did to resolve their own particular banking crisis, right? The SNL crisis in the US and bank resolutions and stuff like that, right? But given this is Malaysia, basically what was done by Tan Sri Azman Yahya at the time, together with the policymakers, was actually quite interesting. It was a very Malaysian solution towards resolving the banking crisis in a controlled fashion, and which was, I think, if you measure that against how other countries did it, actually very, very successful in terms of rates of recovery, in terms of the cost to the public purse, right? Of actually doing this.
And of course, this was a period where maybe today's younger generation don't know, but there was the pegging of the ringgit, all the strict measures that were put in place by the government at the time. I even recall there was a period where you can't even carry any more than a certain amount across the border also, right? In terms of ringgit notes and all that. So then this was the aftermath of that. It was more of the corporate. I guess there were some companies that were still needing a lot of help. Oh, interesting. Okay, so this is also a part where I came across quite ironically. From what I read, when you and Dato Rahman were assigned to take charge at the MRCB and eventually Media Prima Group, kan? So in those days, again, both of you were obviously talents, but again, given the confidence at such a young age to take on the responsibility of these large corporations, kan? My apologies, Tan Sri. I can't remember what I was doing when I was 30, but what goes through your mind when suddenly you are being basically appointed, or how does it come about? Is there like an array of companies which are on the table and say, okay, you help with this one, you help with that one? How does it actually happen?
So this was, like I said, this was really the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis, right? So Dana Harta and Dana Jamin had done a lot to resolve the banking issues, but at the same time there were a lot of corporates which still had problems, right? And as you know, both myself and Rahman had left Dana Harta at the time to set up our own firm and do corporate rescues. But one thing led to another, and we ended up doing some jobs for the government, right? And that's how we got involved dealing with things like IWK and DM Renong and stuff like that, right? So it's not as if essentially the MRCB thing came out of the blue, right? It was basically number 4, number 5 or number 6 in the line of things we've been doing already, right? In terms of resolving issues for the government at the end of the day. And we were then asked basically to take a look at this and see how to resolve this, because it was critically important, because Media Prima, what became Media Prima, or in those days was NST and TV3,
That's right.
was sitting under MRCB. And there was a fear basically that if MRCB went under, then what would happen to those core media assets, which are deemed to be vital from a national point of view, right? In terms of, this was pre-internet, you have to remember, right? So control of the newspapers, control of the TV, essentially was deemed to be significantly important in terms of being able to reach out to people, right? So we went in, and it was quite clear basically that this was a bit different, right? It actually needed a rethink on how to manage the group as a whole, how to restructure the group, right? So in the end, I think we actually changed our model, right? From being just external advisors to becoming internal management, and we actually dropped all other jobs to actually just do this as executives from inside the group.
So it was at this point in time also where Tan Sri Noor Muhammad also came to the picture. The way that I understand, Tan Sri Azman introduced you to Tan Sri Noor, who was, I think he was special advisor to the government at that time, to the Prime Minister at that time, kan?
Yeah, so in that period of time, basically, Tan Sri Azman, he was very kind. He actually he understood that what we wanted to do was to be on our own, right? But he, in a way, opened some doors for us in terms of introductions and all that. And one of those introductions was Tan Sri Noor Yaakob, right? And Tan Sri Noor, I think, was actually a great mentor in terms of helping us to navigate, in terms of this step up in the world, in terms of how we think about bigger corporations, the nexus between commercial realities and political and policy realities, right? How do we navigate that? How do we achieve compromises that work for everybody, right? So that was actually very, very good, and he was the one, I think, who ultimately in those days, together with the Minister of Finance or the Prime Minister, right, made the calls about what to do with some of this stuff, right? Especially those which are deemed to be critically important to the country, right?
So he played quite an active stroke mentor role to help, in a way, guide all of you as these young leaders. Huh?
Yeah, and I think also that there was a conscious decision by the government at the time to break away from the previous model that they had, which was looking at a close relationship in government and a core group of businessmen, helping them to leverage up, helping them to basically to build up, right? But that model, quite clearly during the Asian financial crisis, didn't work because of the over leverage, right? And they wanted to then make that move towards a more professionalized management structure and institutionalized ownership of these assets or these companies, right? So that led to in the early 2000s the birth of the Pujaya Committee, right, for GLC reforms, and over time, basically, I think where we are today now, which is basically a culmination of 20 over years worth of work of slowly institutionalizing companies, bringing in professional management, less dependent on state-backed entrepreneurship, and allowing entrepreneurs to flourish on their own accord, right? But trying to, I think, to reduce that nexus of entrepreneurs and the politics.
I like the term you state-backed entrepreneurs, because again, it was a change in how corporate Malaysia, which had been doing well. Of course, the Asian financial crisis was a major wake-up call, but things had to change. And this is where I must agree that Tan Sri Noor Muhammad Yaakob, he's actually a strong supporter of Cuba Cerita also. In fact, even in my earlier times when I was thinking about this idea, I did bounce off how can we reach an audience of up-and-coming leaders by sharing experiences of our current-day leaders. So, obviously I did try to invite him onto the show, but he was very polite in not saying yes yet. Hopefully one day. But I must say that in my last meeting with Tan Sri Noor, amongst other books he shared was this book titled Reflections. And we'll screen it on nanti. But it was actually a very interesting recollection of how do I say this, an episode where it was in 2001. In fact, it was 18th of October to precise, and I'm now bringing back memories to you also, where he brought along a group of these all of you, all of you young talents, young leaders at the time, and well, this is the one that I have, so I can just to bring back some memories.
Yep.
So the way I read it was that this photo, which is a photo of I'll read out names. Dato Rahman, yourself, Datuk Sri Wahid, who's now Tan Sri Wahid, Omar, Johan Mahmud American, Tan Sri Baki, Datuk Wira Azhar, and of course Tan Sri Said Zainul and Datuk Said Tamim, and of course Tan Sri Noor Muhammad Yaakob. I understand that this photo was taken especially to earmark an occasion when all of you were gathered in the PM's office. The way I understood and what I read was that prior to this date, the Prime Minister had actually, was actually having an interview, I guess at TV3. And the way that story goes, related by Tan Sri Noor in this book, is that he was taken aback by both you and Rahman in terms of your age being so young. And I don't know what actually happens in terms of the dialogue between the Prime Minister and Tan Sri Noor at that time. But obviously, there was a reason to bring all of you to meet him. And so this book, Reflections, is actually a recollection of that particular moment. And also I was reading how everyone gave a recollection of their experience meeting the Prime Minister at that time. Some, obviously, I think yourself too, meeting the Prime Minister for the first time, I understand. Or maybe you for the second time, because he'd been to TV3 before. But one thing I found quite amusing was that obviously everyone in their recollection, in their notes, they said that they were quite nervous, obviously, at all, and nervous meeting the Prime Minister, and some of them meeting him for the first time. But amongst all, you were the one who, as was written here, you were the one who was a bit brave with how you saw the situation, meaning that you didn't want to sugarcoat the situation, maybe, and you were quite forthright with your views, maybe. So I shouldn't say too much. I should really ask you to recollect this particular morning or day when all of you turned up to meet the Prime Minister.
Yeah, it wasn't the first time meeting the Prime Minister,
Okay.
because obviously met before to sort out other things, right? But certainly I think my philosophy has always been basically that your time spent with especially the senior government leaders, right, is normally very limited, right?
Sure.
You have a very short amount of time, and I always believe basically you shouldn't waste that time by fluffing around and normal pleasantries and all that kind of stuff, right? Which unfortunately happens a lot in Malaysia, right? So like it or not, I tend to always be upfront, right? And tell basically whether I'm meeting prime ministers or ministers of finance or whatever, right? Really how I see the situation, right? What are the problems and how I propose to resolve, right? I have been, on occasion, I've been told that I'm maybe a bit too brusque or too abrupt with stuff like this, right? But I always feel basically I'm not there to waste anybody's time, right? I mean, you're the prime minister, you're running the country, you've got a hell of a lot of other things to do. Surely you want to be told straight away, right? Because when I'm running a company or running like EPF Khazanah, right? I prefer my guys to just come out and tell me what's the issue and don't waste time on superfluous stuff, right? So that's just how it is, yeah.
But tell me, it's interesting, and from what the few encounters I've had with you two, I also feel that and what the feedback I get is you're very straight to the point, and you're very pleasant about it anyway. But is this maybe something that, in reflection, you maybe inherited from your parents' style, and your father was a police officer turned lawyer, and your mom was a teacher? Is there something about their style that maybe rubbed off on you in reflection?
No. My parents are far more, I think, socially adept than I am. Let's put it that way. I blame this on being an only child, right? So,
Okay.
and therefore not learning at a young enough age how to play nice with people, and being maybe a bit too direct sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
but again, I mean, it's not in a bad way. You've got a very pleasant demeanor about, very very reserved, I must say, but a very pleasant demeanor about you that doesn't make people feel, how do I say it with all due respect, they don't feel frightened lah. Some leaders, they have that demeanor, whether it's natural or not, they come across someone who's quite fearsome. So people tend to be very cautious in their presence. Okay, so this particular memory, of course, which is very on special occasions. Is it something that in the course of your career, you obviously have dealt with many dignitaries and business leaders, and so do you feel that it's an added advantage to have that ability to not be at awe or not be overawed by the occasion?
Yeah, I think it's actually quite important, right? I think if you think about it, right, even as, say, Prime Minister or Minister of Finance or the people that you deal with, right, they're not going to be essentially in possession of all the details, right? They can't be. They have so many things to look at, right? So many macro issues to worry about, right? That in all likelihood, unless someone has actually told them there's a problem in minute detail, they're not going to be aware of it. I think a lot of the time we make the assumption that people who are in positions of power or in positions of decision making are also in the position of knowing everything, right? And therefore you expect them to make those decisions, right? In view of basically all those facts. But actually it's very far from the truth, right? In my 20, 30 years of working in these situations and dealing with this nature, it's actually very apparent that the higher up the ladder you are, the less you actually sometimes are in touch with what's actually going down at the bottom, right? As a classic case, right? When I was CEO, I always tell this story basically to companies and to managements, right? When you're CEO, like for me, right? All I know basically is that when I have a claim to make, right, I put my receipt into the out tray, and then magically 3 days money appears in my bank account, right?
Okay.
But if you don't actually ask people, right, what is the processes that they're doing, you don't realize sometimes that it's actually in a lot of companies a terrible process, right? Lots of paperwork, lots of red tape, right? When actually things can be simplified, right? So in the same way, right, when I was EPF CEO, when I go down to the branches, I would actually go down, right, and talk to a customer or talk to my counter staff and ask them to take me through, right, a particular process or particular step. Right? Because otherwise, when you're just CEO, you just assume, okay, we decided this is the way it's going to be, right? And nobody actually looks at, for instance, is it an easy process? Is it basically, a customer-friendly process, right? Or even internally, when you talk about claims, right? Is it a process that makes sense to your people, right? So that's the problem, right? Most people assume CEOs know everything. Actually, CEOs know very little about minute detail what's going on, right? And it's the same with prime ministers and ministers of finance. So if you don't tell them, right, that actually, boss, you got a problem here, and this is your problem, and this is how you intend to solve it, most likely they don't know.
And this is where I think, where as a leader, you need to be able to make your next levels understand that you want to hear what the issues are. Because again, this goes back to this demeanor of a leader. If the leader is someone who is, comes across as, I don't want to know problems, or I just have got that fearful demeanor, the people below don't want to raise it or don't want to even show that this is an issue which needs to be addressed.
Precisely, right? I had situations when I was running MRCB, and MRCB is basically a big property and infrastructure developer, right? I was a CEO there, and I built up together with the team there. We built up KL Central, right? But I remember, right, one of the projects I was doing at KL Central, I told the team, wouldn't it be nice to have basically a aquarium or fish pond, right, with a glass bottom, so that people can see the fish from below, right? Okay. And of course, when you're CEO, right, whatever you say is normally taken as gospel, right? And of course, the guys try to implement it, and of course, the stupid thing starts leaking, right? And I tell them, why is it like that? I said, yeah, boss, this is very difficult to do, not a lot of problems. I said, why didn't you guys tell me, right, when I suggested the idea? Then I would just cancel the idea and say, okay, bad idea, right? Same thing, I think, with a lot of leaders, if people, the C-1s, or in the case of government, right, the people advisors talking to the Prime Minister or Minister of Finance, don't tell them it's a stupid idea, it's a bad idea, right? Then bad ideas will happen, right?
So I don't think you said, I don't think it will become across as a stupid idea, but maybe at the end of the day you need to think of an alternative juga, kan?
Sometimes it's just a bad idea, right? and seriously, right, as CEO, sometimes you come up with a really bad, stupid idea. You need someone to really tell you, boss, that one, they're not going to work. And honestly, I appreciate it. I appreciate people
Yeah.
telling me, right, if
Yeah.
dating is a bad idea, right?
Yeah.
And then at least then we can have a proper debate about it.
Yeah.
And as a CEO or as a leader, you got to be open-minded enough to say, okay, I think the guy's got a point, right? Don't have the ego to say, no, it's my idea. I must push through my idea, right? You must have
Or make it work.
make it
something
work.
like that.
No matter what, make it work, right? Find some expensive solution to it, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the simplest solution is just to cancel the idea and do something else, lah.
Kan? Yeah. As I'm listening to you, Tan Sri, there's so many questions that are going through my mind. I'm just like, I want to go back to this point that I also get as I'm coaching, right? Especially the younger talent. How do you, or from reflection, how do you go about engaging? When you're in your earlier younger days, yeah, how do you go about engaging and knowing how to approach people who are much more senior, who come off with a different, how to say, more authoritative demeanor? What has been yours? What has been your style, even to the point of how do you even open up conversations?
I think that for me it's always been, I think, quite doable. Mostly because I think I've developed a way to approach people where even if there's a difference in position or power levels or whatever, right? That hopefully they're able to then listen to me and think about what I'm saying to them, right? And over the years, I guess I've kind of developed this, reputation for being fairly, forthright about what I'm saying, and people can always count on me on giving an honest opinion of what I think a situation is, right? So I've done that, over the last 15-20 years, especially with prime ministers, ministers of finance. Again, like I said, right, I think you have to fundamentally understand that at the end of the day, they are also people who are trying their best, right, to make the right decisions, right? And in Malaysia, sometimes I think power level distance is too far. People feel as if they can't actually open up and be honest on things with them, or they're always suspicious because they think there's a different agenda, whatever it is, right? But in my dealings with all the various prime ministers that I've worked with or served, right, I've always told them, you can always count on me to basically tell you what I think, right? You may not agree, which is fine, right? At the end of the day, you can decide, but at the very least, I can give you points of view or data or facts, right, that you may not otherwise have seen or appreciated, right? And then maybe work with you to find an alternative solution, right, to the problems you're facing.
And obviously, you've been across so many industries, kan? If there's one thing that, how do I say? Because again, sometimes people looking upwards, they feel that if they're not technically sound enough, they're not really made to go all the way to the top. My point of view as a coach is that you don't have to know every single thing, but you must, number one, know how to judge to a certain extent what is fair and what is not entirely accurate. Obviously, having people around you who you trust can give you the right type of information is important. But what about you, Tan Sri? What if there were sort of like two key things that you essentially needed to know, you needed to have every time you moved roles? What would they be?
For me, I think what's really helped is that I've always been, very interested in learning new things, right? So every time I shifted role, I always take time in the first couple of months, especially, right, to really understand the technical aspects of that role, right? So, for instance, when we moved to MRCB, right, I spent the first few months really trying to understand things like civil engineering, right, learning up stuff like that. When I moved to EPF, the first couple of months really was, understanding the mathematics that goes into portfolio management, risk management, right, statistical analysis, right, just brushing up on stuff like that. And it's important, I think, if you are going to move into a technical industry, right, you must know enough of the technicalities of that industry, so that even if you're in a leadership position or a management position, right, you're able to have meaningful conversations with the true specialists, right? So when I moved to EPF as Deputy CEO of Investments, right, I made sure that I learned enough about investing theory, the statistical application of mathematics, right, everything else that backs up portfolio and risk theory, right, so that I could have proper conversations, right, with the people actually running the funds, the technical experts, right. My rule of thumb basically is that you will never learn more or know more than those technical experts, right? But you must learn enough that you can have a serious intellectual discussion in a way that the people that you're working with feel as if that you are actually contributing towards their goals, right? From either a strategic or a planned purpose, and understanding enough of the technicalities that they don't feel as if they're talking down to you all the time, right? So rule of thumb, I would say, is you need to be at roughly about the 90th percentile level. You don't need to be at like the 100th percentile level.
Which is high already, kan?
Yeah, but that's why I think the ones I've seen who've been able to do it well are the ones who can really learn fast, right, and understand the technicalities very, very quickly, right.
And of course, your career has led you to, leading, not just EPF, but also Khazanah, and that, eventually at some point you decided to go into this semi-retirement at a relatively younger age compared to maybe others. May I ask, Tan Sri, and again, your name keeps on popping up each time and maybe obviously there's some basis to it, but each time there's, for example, a change in governor of Bank Negara, appointment of a new Minister of Finance, Tan Sri Shahril's name always appears within the array of names that are being how do I say, rumored to be chosen, and yet today you have taken a distinct role to no longer be fully employed. Well, you are still busy, of course, on many boards, but at this point of time in your life, how did you find that sort of motivation? What was on your mind?
So actually, what's on my mind basically is that when I joined EPF as Deputy CEO, and then when I moved up to become CEO when Tan Sri Azlan left, right? Actually, by the time 2018 came around, right, I already decided at that point in time basically that was going to be my last contract, right, with EPF, and I already been preparing succession planning. I had three very capable DCOs, right, that I was getting ready as potential successors to me. And then 2018 elections happened, and what happened then basically was the new government that came in asked me to shift over from EPF to Khazanah, because they needed to bring in a new board, a new management team, and they asked me to take over from Tan Sri Azman Mokhtar, one of my also a good friend of mine, who's did a really good job in building Khazanah. So, and at that time I told Tun Mahathir, the PM, and the finance minister at the time, Guan Eng, that but I only intend to do one contract, 3 years, right? Stabilize the organization, rethink basically how it works and what's going to happen with it, right? And then basically I was going to leave. Right. So that was actually something which I'd already decided upfront when joining, and we started with the process of reshaping Khazanah, and of course Tun Mahathir, who had come back as Prime Minister again and was my chairman. I worked with him on quite a number of things, and then Tan Sri Muhyiddin came in as PM for the last 1 year or so of my work in Khazanah, and that coincided with COVID and the whole crisis and everything else, which was also very interesting because in my role as MD of Khazanah, working with a lot of the Khazanah team, we help government thinking about policies, and stuff, on the lockdowns and stuff like that, and worked on and I think probably the last thing I did in Khazanah, which probably is the biggest turnaround, was the rescue of Malaysia Airlines during the COVID, right? So that was a massive undertaking, where together with Captain Nizam, the CEO of Malaysia Airlines, and the board there, we pushed through a financial restructuring scheme, taking advantage of the COVID emergency, to push through basically a massive restructuring of the balance sheet and the operations, everything else, right? Which has really worked, and which is why Malaysia Airlines today basically is back to profitability and back to high cash flow generation. So that I think was the end of it, and I was quite happy by the time August 2021 came around, right? And government already found a successor for me in Dato Sri Anwar Faisal, who's a great guy, and I moved on, right? And in fact, one of the internal successors that I was preparing for that eventuality, Azo, had already left earlier to become CEO of PNB.
PNB, that's right. Yeah. So I think that's it's also important, I guess, for you. And then knowing you from your EPF days, how you meticulously did at least do your part to create a succession of leaders. And again, whoever decides at the end, it's fine. But as a responsible leader, you made it a point to cover that and not leave it it uncovered. What's your view today, Tan Sri? You yourself are now chairman of boards and on boards where CEOs are being appointed. Do you think that there is enough effort actually to bring forth the younger talent? I mean, going back to the days when you were at that age, has that sort of era passed, or do you feel there's just too much confidence in the much more senior aged leaders, not old leaders, but I mean, seems to have changed. Yeah.
I think it depends on the company and the view of the board at the point in time, right? And the type of CEO you're trying to get as well. So I think from company to company, it's going to change. It's going to be different. I think those opportunities which I had in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we could rapidly move, came about because of that crisis, right? And it was a crisis which, in a way, had hollowed out a lot of the top leadership because of debt problems, management issues, whatever it is, right? And that created a lot of space for younger people to move up rapidly, who were willing to take, I think, and you have to remember, right? Looking back now, it all looked fine, but in those days, you were taking massive risks, right? Because you were taking up positions in companies which you didn't know whether they would have enough money to carry on, right? So when Rahman and I went into MRCB, for instance, right, they had barely enough cash to function, right? And you had to actually do a lot of work to free up balance sheet, to find the cash to keep going, then restructure the company, split it up. So very high risk work, right? But those only came about because of that crisis. Things are a lot more stable now, and I guess in a much more stable environment, right? Career progression tends to be more stable as well, right? So boards today, I think, are probably sometimes a bit conservative, right? In terms of trying to look for the right candidate for CEO or whatever it is. But I think boards have a duty, I think, to basically, to their shareholders, basically, to try and make sure that they find the right fit at the right time. And sometimes different personalities as CEOs are the right fit at the right time, depending on what you want to achieve.
Yeah. I think, again, myself outside looking in nowadays, especially in my previous life as an executive search person also, I think there's a mixture. Sometimes, obviously, organizations are not fully committed to the internal talent. Therefore, the confidence is always but maybe still being someone who's got a proven track record from outside. But I hope that with leaders like yourself, still you're chairman of Axiata, you're on so many high-profile boards, that you will still lead the way in terms of unearthing the young talent and giving them opportunities and in a way,
I've always believed in, as far as possible, pushing talent from within, right? Okay. Because I think one of the major, really the main job of a CEO and a board is to ensure basically that you have a strength of depth, right, and depth in your talent pool, so that basically you can fill those positions, right? Yes, I think as a board, you are obliged to not only look at your internal succession, but also your external succession and see, what's the best fit, right?
Yeah.
But for instance, in Axiata, when our last CEO left, the CEO that came in basically was an internal successor, right? So it can work, I think, and even in organizations which I led previously, like EPF Khazanah, you always try to make sure there is a strong pool of potential succession candidates, right? And ultimately, of course, the positive have to decide, right? They want an internal successor on the outside, but at the very least, you need to be able to present viable options to them.
Good. Tan Sri, I hope you don't mind. I took the opportunity of engaging or reaching out to some of your former staff and colleagues. It's an opportunity for them to reconnect with you in some way with some questions. I'm just going to pose some questions that that came about from them. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to quickly mention some names. So there's some from EPF, Rodzi, Abu Bakar, Azhar, Ahmad, Suhaizam, Ismail, Mazwin Idrus, Fariza Ali. I hope these names, I'm sure they're still very fond in your memory. The question was things like, what motivates you the most these days as a person, both in your personal life and your career still?
So today, I think I'm motivated by taking on projects in areas which I like to learn about, right? Or which I feel basically, I can bring some of my experience to bear to help out, and at the same time learn something new. So one of the things which I did in the last couple of years, which I'm really, I think, very, very happy about, was actually helping Ministry of Health as a co-chair of the advisory council for the health white paper that went through Parliament, and that was basically part sheep herder, right? Basically aligning all kinds of different resources to come up with it. Partly basically getting technical expertise in to give viewpoints and helping to navigate, the complexities of politics and everything else. So it's very interesting, and also very important for Malaysia, right? We need to have a functioning public healthcare system to help us in the long run. So hopefully a lot of those initiatives that were discussed and approved by Parliament, right, will eventually make their way through and become reality. So that's interesting. I sit on the board of KLK, which is very, very interesting because it's an opportunity to work with a very large family-run business still, and help work with them in terms of thinking through strategic options. It's a very different lens set, right? And interesting, I think what you find is that with a lot of the really old family-run companies, right, their long-term views are perhaps even longer term than some of the institutions, right, that you think about, right, because they really take a very long generational view on how businesses grow and flourish.
Yes. The
So
ups and the downs and the
ups and downs and everything else, right? So yeah, it's stuff like that. So actually, moving away from full-time employment with one employer is just an opportunity for me to actually now break up my time into smaller chunks on things which I potentially may find interesting, or which potentially might be fun to do, or where I can bring particular expertise to bear.
Interesting. And if in reflection, obviously you are a mentor to some today, but maybe other than Tan Sri Noor Muhammad Yaakob, do you any particular mentors that you had that helped you in your career growth?
Yeah, I think there's been quite a few along the way. I think Tan Sri Noor Muhammad Yaakob was quite a big influence. Partly in that very chaotic period of the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. Tan Sri Asman Yahya, I think helped out as well. And was quite good to us. He wasn't that upset when me and Rahman left, knowing basically that we wanted to try something new. And he actually spotted us in terms of opening doors, in terms of introductions for us, which is good of him, right?
Eventually he got you back anyway, in a way lah, kan?
In a way. Yeah. And actually today I still sit on the board of Dana Harta.
Oh, there you go. Yes,
so
that's right.
I'm still, I guess, minding the shop. Actually, even though the Dana Harta now is essentially dormant and doesn't do anything, right? But there's still some leftover stuff that needs to be done. So I'm kind of like the guy sitting in the shop waiting for it to close.
Waiting for another crisis to happen. Good.
No. I think Dana Harta was a very particular tool for a very particular time, right? You don't really want to go down that route again.
Good. If you had a second chance in your career, anytime, and you had the opportunity to do something, to do it differently, is there any particular recollection of a particular moment?
I'm not one to really think of things that way.
Okay.
Right. Mostly because I always feel that everything that you do in your life, right, is always a learning opportunity. You learn from it, you move on. You make mistakes, right? But even mistakes are things you learn from, right? So obviously in the career I've had, like I've told you, right, there've been many mistakes, right? And you learn from them, right? And one of the key lessons you learn from basically is to actually ask the people around you honestly, do you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, right? And hopefully people are brave enough to actually tell you it's a bad idea.
It's a bad
one of the key learnings I've learned, right? But I've always, like I say, I've always viewed essentially that you shouldn't regret the stuff you've done in the past, right? Because that just leads you into all kinds of bad moments of thinking, right? But you should always look forward and learn from what you've done.
Okay. And this is something that I've always observed you from afar also, Tan Sri. You're always calm. Or maybe I say, how do you actually remain calm? What goes through your mind? What would be tips to say an audience of leaders about how do you really stay calm in practically every type of situation?
Yeah, I think it's important to stay fairly level-headed, right? Even during good times and bad times, right?
Okay.
I think if during good times, right, you shouldn't get too far ahead of yourself, right, in terms of thinking that, oh, things are going so well. Because you also have to understand, right, are things going well because economic conditions as a whole, right, are good for you at the time? Or is it because of something particularly clever you've done, right? And understanding that actually makes a difference, right? Because then you don't get too far ahead of yourself, right?
Okay.
And similarly, I think when things are going badly, same thing, right? Are there opportunities that you can then take advantage of, right? So the classic case was, like I said, towards the end of my career in Khazanah, Malaysia Airlines, right? When COVID hit, it was a complete disaster, right, for the travel industry as a whole, shutdowns and everything, right? But actually, for Malaysia Airlines, right, it created an opening, right, to take advantage of in terms of finally getting a balance sheet and operation restructuring that could make it work once we're out of COVID. Right? And the reason for that is very simple, right? Malaysia Airlines, had been suffering for a long time. Everybody knows that, right? The twin disasters and everything else that had led to where it was. But during a time when aviation is booming, pre-pandemic, right? Nobody wants to talk to you, right? In terms of restructuring, because as far as they're concerned, right? If you're in trouble, I just take back all your planes. I have 20 different airlines willing to take your planes, right? But during a crisis, when nobody is flying and everybody's in crisis, suddenly the playing field levels up, right? And that's the opportunity for a business that's in trouble to find a way quickly to restructure and move forward, right? Which is what we did, right? So similarly, when things are going well, right, you also have to understand, right? Is it actually a time for you to take stock and maybe exit an investment, right? When prices are good, right? Because you need to understand whether prices are holding up because market conditions as a whole are very good, or is it because your company that you're holding is actually the class leader, right? If it's not, right, then actually there's an opportunity for you to maybe sell out, right? Collect a really good paycheck on selling out, and then reinvest the money somewhere else. Right? So again, I think especially when you're doing portfolio management, when you're doing investing, you cannot be emotionally attached, right, to those investments.
Okay, interesting.
I used to have a saying to my guys in EPF, right? Everything that we own has a price tag, right? You pay me enough money, I'm happy to sell it to you.
Well, you have to have the discipline too, kan?
Yeah.
So, from what I gathered, Tan Sri, and excuse me if I'm wrong, you seem to have an inclination to see an opportunity, good times or bad times, and maybe that feeling of needing some diversity also is within you, keeping you excited, and in a way, then that helps to calm you down, irrespective of the situation. That's just my reading, lah.
Yeah, I think for me, again, like I said, right, everything in life presents itself in terms of opportunities, in terms of basically, and it's the same for all the organizations that we run as well, right? There's always going to be an opportunity. It's the ability to identify those opportunities and take advantage of them, I think, which really makes a difference.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Tan Sri, I really must say thank you so much, because in this short conversation that we've been having, again, there's just so many questions that goes on through my mind. And, some of the questions may even come up later when I'm actually viewing the podcast when we finished it. But what I really like about this type of conversation is number one, it's very frank. I can imagine the situations that you were going through your career, and in a way handling them or living every day in those parts of your career in a very controlled and calm manner. And I hope that the audience who's watching will continue to be inspired by this type of leadership style. Certainly embrace what they see in you and hopefully adopt it for themselves. And you're still young, Tan Sri. Of course, you make me feel old. So please, you may be sitting on boards, but I know that you're playing such an influential part in corporate Malaysia, and we continue to wish you well, and thank you so much for being such a great nation builder and contributor to the country. And I think this is a very nice way to at least conclude this part of Cuba Cerita, this series, by having you on this episode. And inshallah this weekend we'll be posting it as our final episode for this particular season. So thank you once again. We wish you all the best, wish you good health, and to Puan Sri and the family, and please we'd love to stay in touch with you too.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and all the best for the second season when you guys get off the ground with that one.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So, terima kasih sekali lagi for joining us on this episode. We are certainly very happy with the progress that we've made, and we thank you so much for your support. And please continue to share the word. Just for your advanced knowledge, in season 2, which we plan to launch in April, inshallah, the theme is going to be "What's your why?" How do you maybe find purpose in what you do in your life in general, as well as your career? So we're looking forward to having other guests on our show who are going to be hopefully inspiring you from a maybe slightly different angle, but very much still related to what we are trying to achieve here in Cuba Cerita. So till we see you again, selamat menyambut bulan Ramadan Al-Mubarak. We wish you a pleasant month ahead, and we look forward to seeing you in season 2 of Cuba Cerita. Sehingga itu, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera.